WFA fam, welcome in. Welcome in. We decided to push the waiver ad show. Normally we do on Sunday night. We decided to move it to Monday night because there was 2 Monday night football games. So that's what we ended up doing. So that's why we were one day late. But without further ado, this was kind of a bloody week in terms of injuries. We had lost more quarterbacks. We've lost,
Yep.
some running backs that got hurt. So there's quite a bit to talk about in a few of these departments. Other like the wide receivers, tight ends. I mean, not as much, but at least in the quarterback and the wide receiver, because this week, I mean, we saw once again CJ Stroud left with a concussion, and then Justin Herbert has a fractured finger, which is likely going to end his season. They don't have anything left to play for. I know he's going to get surgery on it. I highly doubt he plays. I think he's probably done for the year. And so, with that being said, I mean, 2 more quarterbacks go down. You're probably going to need some waiver ads this week because I know once we get to the playoffs, you're usually saying something like, "Oh, well, if you're having to stream during this time of the year, you probably aren't making the playoffs or whatever. Your team's not very good." But we've had such a
Not this
massive
year.
amount of quarterbacks that get hurt. Like, I don't think that's the case. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So Matthew Stafford is who I'm going to start out with. On ESPN, he's only rostered in 33% of leagues. On Yahoo, he's rostered in 50% of leagues. So I wanted to go ahead and put him on here because once again, he put together another great game. This time was against one of the best defenses in the league in the Baltimore Ravens. Stafford threw for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns for 23 fantasy points. He now has 3 straight games with 20-plus fantasy points, and now they get by far the best matchup of all the streaming quarterbacks for the Commanders coming up. The Commanders have allowed the second most fantasy points to the position, and he is a must-add if some of you had C.J. Stroud or Justin Herbert. He is 100% the number one guy I want to add. Next up, you have Jake Browning. Now, this is a guy that I would not have thought I would have had on here, but 2 weeks in a row, he has looked solid. He threw for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He also rushed 3 times for 7 yards and another score. Good for 25 fantasy points. He has now put up 25 or more in back-to-back weeks. For context, he has scored 50 points over his last 2 games. He has scored more than Kenny Pickett has all year in fantasy points in 2 games. So if that does anything for you, so or that's just how bad Kenny Pickett is. So one or the other. But anyways, he does have a tougher matchup though this week. It is a home matchup against the Vikings on Saturday, but they have allowed the 19th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Not nearly as good of a matchup, but they do still have really good weapons. And Jake Browning has looked pretty good. So he is somebody I think you can look to add. Old faithful Gardner Minshew is on here, rostered in 28% of leagues. Minshew is back to his normal stat line, throwing for 240 yards and 1 touchdown against the Bengals. This should have been a great matchup, but he managed only a meager 15 fantasy points, which is pretty much what you expect to get from him every single week. This week, the Colts take on a Steelers defense that has allowed the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. So not really a great matchup here, but they look like they could be without J.J. Watt, who under the concussion protocol, so maybe that helps things a little bit. But next up, let's talk about Zach Wilson. This was probably the best effort of Zach Wilson's career, and it came at a time that no one would have guessed. With a rain-filled game against the Texans that nobody wanted to play, extremely low total. Wilson threw for 300 yards, which is just the 3rd time in his career. He has 2 touchdowns. He ended up with two touchdowns and 20 fantasy points on top of that. Next up is a matchup against the Dolphins, who have been pretty average against the position, allowing the 15th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. But I'm going to say, like, if you have to play Zach Wilson, I mean, things are pretty dire. But I know a lot of people have hoarded quarterbacks, especially with all the backups that having to be added. So I did want to put him on here. And then Joe Flacco, the 39-year-old Flacco, has once again had another solid day against the Jaguars. He threw for 311 yards and 3 touchdowns for 21 fantasy points. However, this is probably where the feel-good story comes to an end, because while some will tell you this is a solid matchup, that narrative is wrong. Against the Bears, the Browns will face a Bears defense that has been dominant over the last month. The Browns are this season. The Bears have allowed the 14th most fantasy points. However, over their last 4 games, the Bears have allowed the 7th fewest passing yards per game and have the 2nd most takeaways among all defenses. They've also allowed 13 or fewer points, real points, in 3 of their last 4 games as well. So this is not as good of a matchup here for Joe Flacco, but I know times are tough, and he is widely available because he's Joe Flacco. And then I put Will Levis on here just because of the matchup that he gets this week, but he is somebody else that really is tough to trust as well. So this is kind of the way that I would look at it here in terms of the streaming options this week.
I'll just throw out there quickly since we're shitting on Kenny Pickett for no reason. I'm here for it. Don't get me wrong. Joe Flacco also has more 250-yard and multiple touchdown games. More has more of those than Kenny Pickett does. The Steelers actually don't have one of those since Big Ben. So just to throw to throw more shit on top of that. But let's go ahead and go over to the running backs. This is going to be where it's at this week in terms of waivers. There is a lot to get through. I'm going to lead things off with the Kansas City running backs. Now, both these guys were likely added in any competitive leagues, but they're still they were both of these guys were rostered in less than 40% of ESPN leagues. So I did just want to lead off with them, obviously, because they are going to be in the best offense here. It was notable for me that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he did play two more snaps. He obviously saw more touches than McKinnon. McKinnon, 16 of his 30 snaps came during the 2-minute drill, though. So it does seem like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to, in this one game sample anyway, that Edwards-Helaire is going to be the preferred back. It could easily be because of McKinnon working his way back from the injury that he missed 2 games from. In full PPR leagues, I'd probably still lean McKinnon if he's out there. Half point PPR in standard leagues, I'd go CEH. But both these guys should be rostered in way more leagues than what they are right now. We always saw Alexander Madison go down with what is likely a high ankle sprain. Obviously, with the state of the Vikings as well, there's probably not going to be any reason to rush him back. So Ty Chandler is someone who, if you need a running back who is likely going to be looking at a workhorse type of role, Ty Chandler is going to be that guy. Kenny Nwangu was the only other running back to see any snaps in this game. He only saw 3. So I think it's safe to say that Chandler is going to be the guy going forward. Also, although this offense does not look fantastic, the Vikings do get the Bengals and the Packers in 2 of the 3 fantasy playoff weeks. Both those matchups are going to be really nice for Ty Chandler. So he's high on the list this week. Chase Brown also high on the league, high high on the list this week. He has seen decent involvement in back-to-back weeks. Clearly has more juice than Mixon does at this point of his career. Going back to 2 weeks ago, Brown did see 9 carries. He had 1 fewer this week on Sunday, but he was actually involved in the passing game on Sunday. He saw 3 targets. Obviously, that's where the majority of his fantasy points came in on that 50-yard receiving touchdown. He's going to be one of the top ads for me. I think he can have some standalone value, but obviously, if Mixon were to get injured or go down, he seems like the clear preference for the Bengals. They tried to go with a couple of different running backs earlier in the year in terms of who's going to be the RB2 behind Mixon, but Chase Brown has been so far the only guy who has shown anything in terms of production. So he is a really good ad. Zamir White. We had Josh Jacobs go down with what looks like a hyperextended knee. They are also the Thursday night game. Again, this is a team that's not going anywhere, so I can't imagine they rush Josh Jacobs back out there. So he should be looked at. We also did not see too many offensive snaps for the Raiders after Josh Jacobs went down, but they're going to be going up against a Chargers team that is likely going to be without Justin Herbert. So I can't imagine we see too much Amir Abdullah in terms of a pass catching role, just because they're not necessarily going to need that. I did throw Keaton Mitchell on here. He's still sitting around like that 35% roster percentage on ESPN. I know he's probably not available in your leagues, but if he's sitting out there for whatever reason, he needs to be picked up as well. I wouldn't look too much into this past week in terms of Justice Hill leading that running back group. This was a scenario where the Ravens were playing from behind. So Justice Hill kind of came in. It was the guy who ran a ton of routes, relatively speaking, in terms of the backfield. But it was still Keaton Mitchell, who actually saw more carries than Gus Edwards. So he definitely needs to be rostered. I moved Rico Dowdle out of the pure handcuff range, and I think he is an ad. We saw him get more involved in this game this past week against Philly. He definitely needs to be rostered. He's someone who might have some standalone value, but obviously if Tony Pollard goes down, it's going to be the Rico Dowdle show. Kenny Gainwell kind of in a similar position there. He's getting some touches behind DeAndre Swift, so he should be rostered as well. Because if anything happens to Swift, I do think we see Rashad Penny come into the fold a little bit, but it's clear that that's going to be Kenny Gainwell and some Boston Scott type of action, and then Deonta Foreman. Allowed Roshan Johnson to get Kev's hopes up 2 weeks ago with the injury, but coming out of the bye, Foreman just returns and goes right back to being the lead back. I think he's honestly looked like the best back for the majority of the year, outside of like 1.5 games from Khalil Herbert. But in week 14, we saw Foreman get 55% of the snaps, which doesn't sound great. But he did handle 73% of the running back rush attempts, also had 3 targets on 16 routes run. That was one more route run than Roshan and Herbert combined. So I think Foreman is going to be the guy here. But I also think this could just be a headache, and we could see Herbert be the lead back the next week. Roshan Johnson pops up. But I think as of right now, it does look like Deonta Foreman. So if you need to plug someone in, he's out there. He's widely available. Handcuff plus range, Tyjae Spears, Michael Carter, Dearness Johnson. Again, with the Jags, we have seen Travis Etienne not be as involved in terms of a snap share as he was earlier in the season. So Dearness Johnson is definitely a guy I want to pick up. And then in the handcuffs, Eli Mitchell, Chase Edmonds, the Atlanta running backs, Cordell Patterson keeps getting some touches. He is going to be way more available than Tyler Algier, but both of those guys should be available. Royce Freeman is the only running back getting touches behind Kyron Williams, and Kyron Williams is kind of holding that to himself. But Royce Freeman would be the clear handcuff to have there. And then for some deep ads, Ty Johnson. The running backs of the Bills have been way more involved with Joe Brady taking over. Ty Johnson, has a little bit of juice. I think he has more pop than Latavius Murray. He's doing well with the limited touches he is getting. So if anything were to happen to like Latavius Murray or James Cook, I think Ty Johnson gets a little bit more involved. But in like 14 team leagues and deeper, I think you can throw him in the flex in a pinch. Dario Gambwale, Kev, you were talking about CJ Stroud going down. For the past 2 weeks, Ogunbowale has been the preferred pass catching back for the Texans. They may need him now. I can't imagine there's going to be too many games, or especially for next week. Let me rephrase that. For next week, anyway, if CJ Stroud were to miss with the concussion, they might be without Nico Collins. Obviously, they already lost Tank Dell, so Ogunbowale could be someone to look at. And I threw Chris Rodriguez on here. It did look like Brian Robinson was going to miss multiple weeks with that hamstring injury, but Ron Rivera came out today and said that he expects Brian Robinson to practice. So obviously, if Brian Robinson is going to be back, that just absolutely puts the kibosh on Chris Rodriguez. But for Antonio Gibson, he was sitting around like that 50% ownership on ESPN. If he's out there, you could look to add him. But Chris Rodriguez is just a name in deep leagues to keep an eye on just in case Brian Robinson were to miss. But it does look like he's at least going to try to play and should be a practice this week.
Just wild, right? Like, your team that's out of it. Hey, let's see what Chris Rodriguez can do, right? Let's hold him out. Let's hold him on another week till make sure he's 100% healthy. But you got to run somebody out there. You just got to do it. Anyways, let's move over to the wide receiver position. Now, there's not a ton to talk about here when it comes to I know we got some players on this list, but I kind of wanted to add some players on here just because of not there wasn't a lot of standout options this week. I mean, I put Odell Beckham. I feel like Odell Beckham, Curtis Samuel, and Noah Brown are probably rostered a lot of your competitive leagues. But I still wanted to talk about them. I mean, Odell Beckham is the cover boy for most people this week in terms of the wide receivers to add. Had another solid game on Sunday, but he held in 4 passes for 97 yards and a score for 19 PPR points. While Beckham continues to play a part-time role in terms of routes run, he's still a bigger part of the offense. And the Ravens have a very, very favorable end of season schedule with matchups against the Jaguars, 49ers, and Dolphins, which are all plus matchups for wide receivers. So Odell is somebody if he is sitting out there should be rostered. Curtis Samuel was on bye this past week, but the last time we saw him, he was targeted 5 times, turned that into 65 yards on 4 catches. Commanders' rest of season schedule is tough with matchups against the Rams, Jets, and 49ers, but they should be in passing game scripts in at least 2 of the 3 of those. So Curtis Samuel does make some sense there. Zay Jones. Another, he's probably not likely available, especially off the week he came off with week prior, but still was 29% rostered. But Jones saw a whopping 14 targets on Sunday. However, he was only able to haul in 5 of those for 29 yards. Obviously, not very efficient, but he played 84% of the snaps, and we'll continue to see a very heavy workload with Christian Kirk out on IR. Jonathan Mingo. Mingo's 28% target share once again led the team this week, but he also didn't do much with them, only hauling in 2 of them for 22 yards. But he did see 9 targets in that game. He has now seen 6 or more targets in 5 straight games. But Bryce Young overthrew him on what would have been his first NFL touchdown. Mingo sees the targets to be a viable fantasy option. However, the production is just not following him right now, mainly because that offense is just terrible. But Jonathan Mingo, if you're looking in a pinch, you're looking for somebody, Jonathan Mingo does make some sense. Next up, let's talk about Michael Wilson, the guy I've been talking about all year. But Wilson returned to their unofficial practice session on Monday, which is a very positive sign. He has missed their last 3 games due to an injury. But prior to the injury, he had 50 or more receiving yards in 5 of the 8 games he played in. And now with Kyler under center, Wilson could be a solid flex option. I expect him to return back to the starting lineup and be a every down wide receiver. He's also widely available. It should change with matchups against the 49ers, Bears, and Eagles. 2 of those are very good matchups against wide receivers. So Michael Wilson is near kind of the top that I would look to add, mainly because I just think guys like Odell, Curtis Samuel, Noah Brown are all probably going to be widely owned in most leagues that are competitive anyways. Demario Douglas, he has missed the last 2 games with a concussion. He should have a shot at returning this week. Douglas will continue to be a volume-based flex option in PPR formats, but they do get really positive game script matchups, at least passing scripts against the Chiefs, Broncos, and Bills. He's only rostered 20% of leagues. Quentin Johnston. I've talked about this guy. He's 21% rostered. To me, you'd have to be kind of desperate to add Quentin Johnston. I know the 91 yards on 3 receptions look pretty intriguing, but the majority came on a rare, impressive 57-yard reception from Easton Stick. The opportunity has been there the last month, and he's done little with it. Now, with Herbert out for the foreseeable future, he's going to be even less intriguing. But if you are desperate, he's going to be out there running routes for sure. Hopefully, maybe this is a sign of things to come, that maybe he's kind of figured some things out, because he has dropped that pass more often than he's caught it. It was a very nice catch for that 57-yard that really kind of made his day, but he is really hard to trust. And now it looks to be one of the worst offenses in the league. Now you're going to have Easton Stick out here handling the quarterback position. Some other guys that I just wanted to hit on, maybe some guys, they're not really must add for me, more so stash. Not, I don't like to say stash with only 3 weeks left of the season, but maybe guys, if you're in a pinch, you need a flex option. Michael Gallup, 12% rostered. He caught 3 of the 5 targets for 48 yards at a score. He's going to be extremely hard to trust, being the number 4 target in the offense due to only running about 50% of the routes. But if you're extremely desperate due to injuries, he is attached to one of the best offenses in the league, and on offense that throws the ball a lot. So Michael Gallup, you could hope and pray for a touchdown. Rashad Bateman, much like Odell Beckham, he has one of the best remaining season schedules, just like we talked about. But he did see his route participation drop from 85% the week prior down to 46%. But Rashad Bateman was battling the flu all last week, so this is likely the reason that we saw such a steep decline. And as Nelson Aguilar saw a jump from 40% to 67% in week 14, so I do think that it had a lot to do with it. Rashad Bateman 16%, and then Kadarius Toney. I don't really want to mention his name, but here we are. We finally saw a big movement from the Chiefs. The way they use their wide receivers this week. Rashee Rice ran a season high 82% of the routes and saw a team high 27% target share. However, we saw MVS and Sky Moore drop significantly, as they fucking should, and Tony jumped up to nearly 50% of the routes and saw a 24% target per route run rate, which is just behind Rashee Rice. Tony was a half yard away from scoring a touchdown off a lateral from Travis Kelce, but Tony is extremely hard to trust and would have to be really hurting. But Tony is seeing a bump in usage, and somebody that they're going to manufacture touches for this right now. He's kind of their best, one of their best playmakers. I know he does a lot of dumb things. He drops a lot of passes. Can't figure out where to line up. But without those things considered, Kadarius Toney still is somebody that is going to see a lot of targets, and their schedule remaining is against the Patriots. It's against the Bengals, which is a great matchup. Against the Raiders, which is a good matchup. So, I mean, the rest of the season schedule should be pretty favorable for them. And then Parker Washington was another player I wanted to highlight. Kind of thought of putting him as kind of like an ad, but he caught 2 of 3 passes for 27 yards and a score on 10 fantasy points. He only saw a 6% target share, though, which will make him hard to trust, but he is worth an ad in deeper formats.
Let's wrap it up with the Week 15 tight end streams. There are actually a couple decent options here, depending on how deep you need to go. But we're going to lead it off with Isaiah Likely and Logan Thomas. Both those guys are rostered in about 45% of ESPN leagues. Isaiah Likely is obviously going to be the one to roster here in the best offense. Did have a solid day on Sunday. A lot of that coming on the basically like the broken play where he was left all alone on the left side and ran in for the touchdown, but he should still be at the top of the list. Logan Thomas, you can always count on him for 4 for 40. If he finds the end zone, he's really going to make you happy. But he's obviously going to be in the streaming conversation week in and week out. Tucker Craft going to be out there running a ton of routes with Jordan Love, although they are not looking great right now going up against the Giants. But he's obviously in the discussion as well. Tanner Hudson, he keeps putting together solid days, solid weeks in terms of fantasy production. Jake Browning, we had the bad week, the first start he had, but the past two games he's been looking really solid in replacement of Joe Burrow. So Hudson found the end zone once again this week, and that's really the only thing you can hope for out of your tight ends. Michael Mayer, again, out there running a ton of routes. Davis Allen is someone who is interesting as long as if Tyler Higbee is out. We saw Davis Allen, the fifth round rookie for the Rams, come out and end up being the guy at tight end with Hunter Long going down with a knee injury. Made the most of it, played 73% of the snaps, ran 63% of the routes, caught 4 of his 5 targets for 50 yards and a score. Definitely a thin play here, and he's only going to be viable if Tyler Higbee were to miss again. And then Gerald Everett, Kevin, you're kind of talking about Quentin Johnson, but Gerald Everett here, you don't love it with Easton Stick being at quarterback, but saw the most targets for the Chargers. And another name I didn't have on here would be Hunter Henry. I don't necessarily want to chase what he did this past Thursday against the Steelers. Yes, he had the 2 touchdowns, but he had 3 catches. That's obviously not a repeatable performance, but he's someone you could take a look at in Week 15 as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully we get Trey McBride back this week for everybody that has him. So I feel good about that. Anyways, let's get out of here. Answer Manuel's dealing with killer injuries. JT Pacheco, Christian Watson, now Tyreek. Yeah, I mean, uh, everybody is right. I mean, I feel like the people that are going to make the fantasy championships this year, are the people that were able to limp in with the least amount of injury suffer to their team because so
Yeah,
many injuries this year. There's a massive list of like quarterbacks that have gotten hurt this year, and the backup quarterbacks we're seeing. I mean, we're talking about Joe Flacco being relevant. We're talking about Jake Browning being relevant. I mean, there's just been a wild year for injuries, and so it has really derailed most people's fantasy season. I mean, you hate to see it, but that's where we're at right now. So
yeah.
it's just been brutal. And I didn't really mention the Tyreek thing when we talk about wide receivers, mainly because he seemed like he's okay. He ran off the field. They're holding him out, but the Dolphins are also really precautious, and so I think it's more due to that than anything. I don't expect this to be a long term ad. I think if you wanted to look at it, like I don't think there's anybody that really stands out ultimately, but you probably look at like Braxton Berrios or Cedric Wilson would probably be the two names there. So, and then Isaac, would you prioritize Chase Brown, Chandler, or White? I think it has to be Chandler because Chandler could be more of a long term ad
Yeah.
versus the others, where it's probably more short term. Because Madison suffering, if he does have a high ankle sprain, you probably end up seeing him maybe miss the rest of the year, possible, depending on how bad that high ankle sprain is. And Chandler would definitely be the guy there. Past that, I think then you would look at Zamir White because Zamir White, if Josh Jacobs were to miss, I know he missed pretty much all the second half this past week against the Vikings, then he would be the definite backup. He would be the guy that would step right in and play the Josh Jacobs role and get those touches, and then it'd be followed by Chase Brown. Chase Brown needs an injury, but I will say Chase Brown has looked damn intriguing so far these last couple of weeks when they've given him touches.
Yeah.
Super explosive. I don't think that's going away. So if you were desperate, you probably could look at that. But it's been rough in these parts.
Real quick, before we jump out of here, I do just want to say that, like, even if like you did avoid the injury bug this week, do not sleep on adding some of these handcuff type guys. Like if you're sitting out there, you have someone you can drop for like a Rico Dowdle, for a Dearness Johnson, whoever, and Elijah Mitchell. He's widely available. I don't think he should be. Although it's kind of weird that he's been dealing with injuries and has missed some games despite not seeing a ton of touches. Like I don't know why this guy is banged up all season. But if you are going into the playoffs, do not just sit there and not pick anyone up. You should definitely be picking up these handcuff type running backs. That's why we've been pounding the table for it for the past couple of weeks leading up to this point. This is the time to start adding these handcuff running backs, because you don't want to be out there and, especially depending on how your waivers run. Maybe you already blew all your fab on someone like, a Kyron Williams or a Puka early in the season, and you don't have fab to pick up any of these guys, or you're lower on your waiver priority. This is the time to pick up some of these handcuff type running backs, so you're not battling everyone who's now going out and trying to add, Ty Chandler and McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no buys in our leagues. It's a 10-team league, but I did manage to get the number 1 seed. Let's go.
Let's go. This is America's team right here.
Yep, that's what we're doing. That's where we're at. Let's keep it going. Keep the good vibes rolling. And then Isaac, I might go for Brown for upside. I would go for Ty Chandler. I mean, Brown may not. I mean, Joe Mix is not going away. Joe Mix is still going to be handling the bulk of the touches, and so I'm not counting on that, right? Like he's not gonna be a player that's gonna be putting up like 15, 20 fantasy point production. I know that we've seen like Achane and Mitchell do some of that stuff, but that is super thin to try to count on. But he's not an Achane. Achane last week saw like 17 touches. Like you're not going to see that from Chase Brown, and Ty Chandler will. Like Ty Chandler will probably handle 75, 80%, if not more, of the opportunities. He's also going to handle the backfield touches. Some positive news too, something I guess I didn't mention because it didn't really matter in terms of like somebody should add. But Justin Jefferson sounds like he's going to be fine. All the injuries were cleared. O'Connell came out today and said that he could practice this week. That there's no injury. It was negative. So that is a positive for Justin Jefferson. And so if he is, they said he could have a shot at playing this weekend. So I know it was brutal. It was ugly, that game, 3-0. But Ty Chandler, especially their matchups, they get Cincinnati. With Cincinnati's defense has been absolutely terrible, and then you get Detroit and then Green Bay.
Sorry, I saw Tyreek just jogged into the field, and then as soon as he jogged into the field, Tua just ripped one downfield, and I thought it was maybe to Tyreek, but it was a go route to Devon Achane lined up on the outside, and he just missed it too. So I was just happy to see Tyreek was back on the field, and then whenever that play just missed, like I said, Achane literally lined up way outside, just runs a go route, and then just missed it.
Well, at least he's back out there. See, So, anyways, that being said, let's go ahead and get out of here. Like I said, I think Ty Chandler, if I was going to rank them in terms of who I'd want, I think Ty Chandler would probably be 1, followed by Zamir White would be 2 in terms of just this week. We can't focus on 2 weeks from now unless you have a first round bye or something like that where you're cruising. Then fine. Then Ty Chandler would 100% be the priority. But for just this 1 week, I think you still look at Ty Chandler being 1 and then Zamir White being 2. I think because Zamir White, if Josh Jacobs were to miss, we don't even know that for sure yet. But it does sound like more likely that Alexander Madison will miss. So Ty Chandler is the easy number 1 ad for me in terms of options. Unless I don't even know, because like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I know if he was sitting out there, like he got a lot of touches, but it's still Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and they're playing the Patriots, which isn't a great matchup because their defense has been really solid this year. So I don't know about that, and who knows? I mean, Pacheco could be back this upcoming week. They called it a shoulder contusion, so that could also change there as well. So, anyways, let's go ahead and get out of here. Hopefully, there's no more injuries in these Monday night games that we don't have to worry about, because it's been super frustrating there in that situation. So, that being said, hope everybody has a good rest tonight. We'll be back again shortly with the rankings this week. A lot of football this week. We have Thursday night football. We have 3 games on Saturday, full slate of games on Sunday, and Monday night football. So we have a ton of football coming over the next couple of weeks between now and then Christmas weekend as well. So hope everybody has a good rest of the night. Let's if you have any questions, leave in the comment section below. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.